Okay, slight disclaimer before I get into this video, but a disclaimer, you do not have to agree with these opinions. I know that I agreed with a lot of them, or like half agreed with a lot of them, but you do not have to agree with them. It is purely a matter of opinion and not fact, and crochet is very subjective. There's no real definitive fact to it aside from what to do and what to use with crochet. Keep that in mind going forward within this video and going to this subreddit thread. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the studio. I did find a couple of crochet related Reddit threads, and we're going to look through one right now, specifically the unpopular opinions about crochet. And as usual, at the time that I'm recording this, I do not have the ability to put links down below in the description, but once I'm able to do that, I will do that as soon as possible. Put the link for this down below in the description as soon as possible. I will also try to comment the link for this once this video is up, so you guys have access to this if you want to look through it. The person who I assume created the subreddit thread, their unpopular opinion, the first one says, I think that amigurumi or crochet toys or anything that has no utilitarian value are a waste of time and yarn and generally just dust collectors. Yeah, like I definitely understand why people think, or why people might agree. I 100% agree, especially if you're not selling anything. If you're making it as like gifts or for yourself, I can 100% see how and understand how someone might view this as a waste of time when making it, and then a waste of yarn and other materials like polyfill and the safety eyes. Like I could 100% understand how people would, as I said, view that as a waste of time and yarn and materials. However, I do disagree with this one specifically, just because I feel like, specifically like they said, amigurumi crochet toys, if you have children in your lives or people who like stuffies, then it is going to be of use of utilitarian value in the sense that they will appreciate it. It really depends on who you're talking to, I think, as to what might be utilitarian. There was a post in a Facebook group that I'm in, and a crochet Facebook group that I'm in, that said that they get upset when they find out that something they made for someone else, crocheted for someone else, when they find out that it isn't being put to use. You know, when they put so much time and effort and put in a pretty good yarn or put in pretty good materials for it, when they find out that that is just being used as like decoration or just set aside and not being used. So that feels like it's kind of in that same vein where it's like if you make something that's utilitarian for someone, like a cup cozy or a coaster, and it's like you want to use it and you don't want it for display unless you don't care. I'm kind of in the middle. I can understand, and for me it really depends on who you're making the item for. First comment that I'm seeing after that is my unpopular opinion is that it's okay to not become advanced or even intermediate. I make blankets for my house and baby. I make scarves. I use single and double crochet. I also make socks and beanies, and I'm perfectly happy with that. At some point I might venture into mittens or sweaters, but I'm happy to just be a beginner forever because it's fun. I also have never used a pattern because I can't figure out how to read them. I just wing it. I do agree with that one too. I feel like there's so much emphasis in the crochet community. I'm new to crochet, and unlike this person, I kind of want to do more complicated things, and it's perfectly fine to not want to do complicated things in the crochet community. But I feel like there's so much emphasis on becoming advanced, on knowing how to do such complicated stitches and weaving items together. I feel like there's so much emphasis on being more advanced in the crochet community that it's like sometimes it's okay to, or not sometimes, it is okay to just enjoy the basics of crocheting and not want to go past that. That is perfectly fine, because there is a comfort in the basics. That is perfectly okay. And this is your little PSA. If you're getting into crochet, you do not have to learn the complicated stitches or weaving things together. You do not have to become advanced within a short period of time. Like, that takes time. This one I'm seeing, it's one of the later comments that I'm seeing, is I never do a gauge swatch and almost never block unless absolutely called for. You know, I kind of agree with this one actually, because most of the time when you buy yarn, there'll be a gauge swatch on the yarn label. Like with this one, this is Loops and Threads Impeccable Acrylic Yarn. This one has, like most labels will have a gauge swatch. This one is 18 stitches and 24 rows for something that is 4 inches by 4 inches or 10 centimeters by 10 centimeters. And I think at this point in time, with the crocheting community, it's almost kind of pointless to do a gauge when you're looking at a pattern, or when you're creating a pattern. I think it's almost kind of pointless to do a gauge, because most yarns, as I said, the label will have a gauge swatch, and when you're making a pattern, you can't guarantee what kind of yarn that person is using. And if you're doing like amigurumi or stuffed toys, a pattern for that, it's less necessary to do a gauge, because usually it's like kind of circular or circular-esque. So my unpopular opinion, adding on to this one, is I think it's kind of pointless to do a gauge swatch, because most yarns have one. And if it's something basic like a blanket, like a pattern for a blanket, then you really don't need one, because again, you can't guarantee what kind of yarn the person reading the pattern is going to be using. And as for blocking, this is in reference to granny squares. I also agree with this one, where it's like you don't really need to block unless it's called for, or unless you really feel like it needs to be blocked. As I mentioned in previous videos, I have quite a few patterns in the works that are granny squares, and they're granny square blankets, and in that situation, blocking the granny square isn't necessary, because you're ultimately going to weave it together, and it's not going to look perfectly square cut at the end, because it's a blanket and it's not meant to like look perfectly straight. So I agree that unless it's called for a very specific reason, blocking is not needed, and gauge swatches are not needed, again, unless it's absolutely necessary. This one, I'm kind of in the middle on with this one, but at the same time, I also kind of agree. So this person said, yarn hauls are embarrassing. Oh, you just spent £1,000 on yarn for no reason, now you're asking for ideas. Tough, should have thought about it before you bought it. Edit, just to clarify, I don't mean stashes unless you specifically bought stuff to add it to a stash. I mean those videos where they've just gone to a local shop and bought anything they thought was kind of pretty, and now they have no idea what to do with it. I'm kind of like on the fence, because like with other comments where it's like, if it makes you happy, then go for it, you do you. If it's not harming anyone, again, go for it, do you. But at the same time, I also do agree with this, because at least for me, I am very deliberate when buying my yarn. If I can't think of a pattern that I can use that yarn for, then I try not to buy it. And if I can't see myself doing that pattern within a reasonable time frame, I would say like 1 to 3 months. If I can't see myself using that yarn for a specific pattern within a 1 to 3 month time period, then I'll try not to buy it. And also too, like even if I have a pattern idea for it, and even if I can see myself using the yarn within that 1 to 3 month period, I really try to think of like, okay, do I actually have the time to do it? Like, can I actually set aside the time to work on this? I really try to be deliberate in buying my yarn and what I buy. Let's see, how much is £1,000 in dollars? That's about 1,300 US dollars. So it's like, yeah, I cannot see myself spending that much money on yarn in one go without good enough reason. Again, I'm kind of in the middle, or like I said, if it's not hurting anyone and if it's making you happy, go for it. But at the same time, for me at least, I'm very deliberate with my yarn choices, so I do agree with that person. The next one that I'm saying is, you shouldn't sell your items if you're still learning basic stitches. Also, if you're slow, like 150 hours for a throw blanket, you probably shouldn't charge an hourly rate. Work out your craft before you try to charge hundreds and hundreds of dollars for a throw blanket. Okay, so to kind of address the first part, you shouldn't sell your items if you're still learning basic stitches. I kind of agree to an extent, you know, where it's like, if you're still learning the basic stitches, as in single, double, and treble, and then like the halves of those, like half double and half treble, then like if you're still learning that, the half stitches to a lesser extent. But again, if you're still learning basic stitches, then I do think that you should get a handle on those stitches before you start selling, and also get a handle on your tension and your pacing of everything, because different tensions, different pacings can affect the way a piece looks, especially if it's amigurumi or a stuffed toy. Definitely get the basics of crochet down before you start selling things. But if you have like a good handle on the basics, you don't necessarily need to know how to increase or decrease stitch, or how to make things into a circle or like a sphere for a plushie. You don't necessarily need to know like advanced techniques to sell your items. You just need to know the basics and have a good handle on the basics, which is what I think this person is saying, but I wanted to get that out there. You just need to know the basics. Also, the second part, if you're slow, like 150 hours for a throw blanket, you probably shouldn't charge hourly rates. minutes. I do agree with that one. And when I'm calculating like the amount of time it's like taking me to do like a granny square blanket, I am kind of on the slower side when it comes to crocheting. I'm not super slow, but I am on the slower side, like I said, when I'm kind of adding up generally how much time I'm taking to work on like the granny square blanket I'm working on, the baby one. I'm not gonna go with an hourly rate for that one because it is a baby blanket and it's granny squares, and with that one I'm just gonna go with the weight of the amount of yarn used rather than an hourly rate, because like I said, when I was doing like a general time frame, I'm not finished with it and I'm not one to really keep track of how long it's taking me to do something. It maybe takes me like 30 minutes to complete a granny square on average. When I was adding that up, it was maybe like 300 hours to finish the granny square blanket, or at least the one side, because I haven't decided if I'm going to do it like a double-sided blanket. And then if I do like bare minimum wage, it's like $15 an hour, $17 an hour, which would make it up to like $1,500, which I'm not going to charge for a baby blanket. So with that, I am going to go with the amount of material used and just charge it based off of that. But yeah, I do agree that you should really look at the way you're charging items and really analyze the best way to charge a certain item, because sometimes charging it at an hourly rate isn't the most reasonable if it's over, I would say if it's like over like 48 hours or under an hour, then that's when you should really start analyzing how exactly you're charging for an item. Okay, so the last one I'm going to look at, another one that I agree with. I'm like 50% agree with, also 50% on the fence about it. But this person said, if you have a crochet blog and only use it to plug your YouTube tutorials and not supply a written pattern, we can't be friends, lol. I go to your blog so I can follow a written pattern. I would have just gone to YouTube otherwise if I wanted a video. I agree with this. If you have a crochet specific vlog as well as a YouTube channel for crochet and you're promoting the fact that you share patterns on both, you should make patterns accessible to both. It shouldn't be a situation where if you're posting to your blog, you say, go to this YouTube video if you want a pattern for items X, Y, or Z. Or if you're posting on YouTube, you shouldn't be saying like, oh, if you want a pattern, you should go to blog posts X, Y, and Z. If you're saying you share patterns, you should make patterns in almost every format, which is basically written out and video. And it shouldn't be a situation where you tell people to go to another source to get the pattern that you're sharing. It should be a situation where it's like you share the pattern in a YouTube video and you say, if you need a written out pattern, go to this blog post, or in the blog post, if you need a visual video aid or photos, go to this YouTube video. Okay, so depending on timing, I don't know if I'm going to include this one. I wanted to throw it in here. This person said, I don't really care if you're supposed to start your skein from the inside or if I'm supposed to start my skein from the inside. I'm just fine doing it from the outside. I 100% agree. If you've seen any of my Instagram posts, any of like the thumbnails here on YouTube, I don't like skeins. I don't like the shape of skeins. That's usually how they come in. I'm borderline okay with cakes, if I really have to be okay with cakes, the shape at least, but I prefer my yarn balled up. For me, I feel like having the yarn in balls gives me better flow and it's easier to control my tension with balls over cakes and skeins. Something that really annoys me with skeins is that there's so much like flip-flopping around, and I know that going for the inside, you're probably not going to get that as much, but at the same time, when I've tried to go through the inside, it always ends up a little bit knotty and I'm always trying to like unknot it. So I end up just balling all of my yarn, or let my sister ball my yarn because she really likes doing that. But I just find balls to be so much easier, the yarn balls, so much easier to work with than skeins or cakes, or I haven't worked with a hank before, but I feel like my opinions would be the same about hanks. Hanks again might be that middle ground, but again, I have not worked with one, so that's just my opinion. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.